Hi class, we're ready to get started on our 2.4% Notes Part 1 video. You should already have your guided note sheet, so we'll get started. First of all, you need to know that a percent means part of 100. Okay? Keep in mind it says percent. The root word for cent means 100. So that's why we get the definition part of 100. So when we're looking at something like 10%, 10% basically means 10 out of 100. And we can represent that in decimal form by actually moving the decimal place over 2 times because we have 2 zeros in 100. So we can represent 10% as 0.1. If you want to add the 0 just to make you feel comfortable, you can, but it's the same thing as the decimal 0.1. Okay? We can represent 25% as 25 over 100. And as a decimal, 25% is the same thing as 0.25. Notice it's because we can move our decimal place over 2 times. Okay? Try the next two. Turn it into a fraction and then turn it into a decimal. And when you come back, we'll reveal the answers. You can pause now. Alright, so I actually want you to come find me, Miss Fersner, and I want you to show me what you wrote as a fraction version of 60% and 99%. And when you finish that, you can come back to the video. So now I'm going to assume that you already finished that and we're going to move on. So let's talk about where you can see percents in the real world. You can see percents when we're talking about taxes, when we're going shopping, when we're dealing with interest on maybe a house payment, a car payment, student loans, or when we're dealing with tips. For those of you who don't know what a tip is, when you go out to eat at a nice fancy restaurant that you sit down in, you'll leave a tip with the waiter or the waitress. And a tip is basically a payment that you give a waiter for their service, in addition to however much it costs for the food. Normally, there's a percentage that you are expected to tip, and that normally ranges between 10 and 15%. So we're going to deal with some problems like that today. So, moving right along, when we're solving percent problems, I want you to keep 2 things in mind. Always think part of the whole, okay? If you have an amount and you're asked to find the percent of that amount, the amount itself is the whole, and the percent is the part that you're trying to find. Also, you want to ask, is the problem asking you to increase in percentage or decrease in percentage? Based on the wording of the problem, you'll either end up with a price that's higher than what you started with or a price that's lower than what you started with. Some problems may even just ask you what the percentage amount is, so you want to make sure that you pay attention to what the problem's saying. For example, let's say you have a problem that says you have an amount and we're going to take 40% off of that amount. Okay? The word off already tells us that we're going to be decreasing in some way. Okay? So, let's look at this. When we see a problem that says 40% off, thinking of that whole, okay? Remember, percent means part of 100. So if 100 is the whole and we have 40% off, then how much are we actually going to be paying? Okay? If I subtract 40 from 100, I end up with 60. So if a problem says 40% off or a store says 40% off, you're actually only going to be paying 60%. Okay? So let's write that down. Okay? Now, what you'll do is multiply that amount, or whatever percent off. Let's say it's a shirt. That's $10. Okay? You're going to multiply that $10 times 0.6. Okay? Now, you might be wondering, where did that 0.6 come from? We're always going to change our percent to a decimal by moving the decimal place over twice. And that's how we get this decimal, okay? So when we're dealing with these problems, we're going to always change our percent to a decimal, okay? And when we multiply the cost by this 6%, that's going to give us how much we're actually going to be paying. Okay? Now let's look at this problem, or this example. If we see a situation where we're required to pay 15% more, that means we're actually going to be increasing. So we're going to have to pay more. You can see this when it comes to tips, interest, or taxes. What we're going to do is we're going to first find the 15% of the total. By multiplying that total amount by 0.15. Now, you may be asking me, how do we get 0.15? Remember, whenever we're dealing with these problems, we can't multiply times 15. We have to change this to a decimal. And the decimal version of 15% is going to be 0.15. Okay? The second thing we'll have to do once we get the answer, once we get that tip or interest or tax amount by multiplying the total by 0.15, we're going to add that amount to the total. Okay? So this is essentially what we do when we go to restaurants. We're going to look at a few examples now. Here we go. Our first example says, Megan has to pay a 5% sales tax on her groceries, which were $45. What is the total amount she has to pay? So first thing, we know we have an additional tax of 5%. We're asked what the total amount that she has to pay is, so that means we're going to be finding out how much the taxes are, and we're going to be adding that to this total amount. So we already know that we're going to be increasing here. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this 5% and we're going to turn that into a decimal. Okay? That decimal version, if we move the decimal over 2 times, the decimal version of 5% is going to be 0.05. Okay? Now that we have this, we're going to multiply our total amount right now, the groceries amount, 45 times 0.05. Okay? And when you do all the math for that, you're going to actually end up with 225. Now, keep in mind, when we're multiplying decimals, we need to draw a line out to the side and see how many places are behind the decimal. We have 2 spaces. So that means we're going to shift this decimal place over 2 times. That's going to give us $2.25. Okay? This number represents the sales tax amount. Okay? Now, this is not the total. This actually represents 5% of $45. But the question doesn't ask for the tax amount. It asks for the total amount she has to pay when we add on this tax. So, how do you think we're going to find the final answer? We have to multiply $45 we have to add $45 to $2.25, which is going to give us $47.25. This is our total with tax. And our final answer. Okay? Let's move on to our next problem. Before we move on, if you had some issues with the first problem or couldn't understand some parts, I want you to do one of 2 things. One, I want you to rewind back, listen to the video again, and try to understand. Number 2, I want you to come find me and ask for additional help. Now let's jump into the next problem. Cardi went shopping and bought a purse worth $78. The store had a special 30% off sale for every item in the store. How much will the purse cost with this discount? Ooh, discount, so that means we're going to be decreasing. Now, here's how this is going to help us. If your final answer ends up being more than $78, that means you didn't do the problem correctly. If we're decreasing, that means we need to end up with a lower cost. So the first thing we're going to do, we recognize that the store has a 30% off sale. Let's reason in our head. If it's off and we're decreasing, 30% off means you're paying what? Okay, let me see if anybody can guess it before I say it. If it's 30% off, remember we're talking about percent means part of 100. 30% off means you're actually paying 70%. And for those who don't understand how I did that, 100 minus 30 equals 70. So if the store is having a 30% off sale, that means you're going to actually be paying 70%. Now that we know the percent that we're paying, let's change this percent to a decimal, which is going to be 0.7. Now, the last thing we have to do is multiply the price of the purse times 0.7, because we're only going to be paying 70% of this cost. Now, when I do my multiplication, I come out to get this number. Okay? And when I move my decimal over one time, I'm going to get 54.6. Now, we know in terms of prices, we need to add a 0, so that's actually going to be $54.60. Okay? This is our final answer. This is our discounted price, because this is 70% of that. And because we have 30% off, we're only going to be paying 70%. So this is our answer. Let's move to the last problem. Ms. Fersner treats her students to a nice restaurant for their hard work, but requires them to tip their waitress. If Axel's food totals to $10.50 and the gratuity is 15%, what is the correct tip amount? Now let's keep this in mind. What is the correct tip amount? Not what is the total with the tip, but what is the correct tip amount. So we're only going to find what is 15% of $10.50. For those who don't know, gratuity is the percentage rate that you would pay at a restaurant for the waitress's service. Okay, so it's another word for tip. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this 15% and we're going to change it to a decimal, which is going to be 0.15. Now, the last thing we need to do is multiply $10.50 times 0.15. And our final answer here is going to be 1.575. Okay? When we do all the math associated with that, I already did it in my calculator. Okay? Now we know as a dollar amount, we can round this to be what? $1.58. This is the tip amount. Okay? And this is what the question asks us, so this is our final answer. Okay? This amount, $1.58, is 15% of $10.50. Now that we're finished with these problems, I want you to make sure that you understand them. If you don't, seek my help. If you do, go ahead and get started on the next part of the task sheet. Please make sure, though, that you fold your notes correctly, that you glue them in your ISN with your ISN labeled at the top with the page number. Tape it down in a way that allows you to open it up for future reference. Come and show me, and you will be done. Okay? You'll get your name taken off the task list. You can move on to the next activity. See ya.